So, scale of 1 to 10, 1 being lowest, 10 being highest. How important was the Torah to you on November 12th, 2024? And how important is the Torah to you now on November 12th, 2025? Scale of 1 to 10, round your tables, go.
9.5.
Okay, I don't know that I can answer it because I'm going to be quite honest, I've missed some of it. I'm not all caught up.
Okay. I think it was like a 9.9 for me because a lot of things I didn't know that were very important. Like just when God made a covenant with Abraham. I mean, once it was explained to me, I didn't know. I had read it before, but I didn't know what it means to cut the animals in half and go through it. How serious of a statement that was, you know.
I think for me, I missed a lot too, but prior to now, I always thought the Torah was like not for us. It was like for
the Jewish
it was
people.
yeah, for like Jewish people, like people who didn't believe in Christ. That's what they lived by. And yeah.
All right, so looking back to last year, what's your number? Back in 2024, when we were all so young. How so much energy. What was the Torah to you? What was your number? This group over here, what was your number last year? 0 to 10. All right, you keep thinking. This table over here, what's your number? 0.
7.
Okay. 2 to 3. All right. Tom?
Well, the question is, how important is the Torah?
How important was it to you last year?
Yeah. Well, the story of Adam and Eve is like my backyard. I've got all this fruit around,
Okay, so it was important to you.
but I don't have Eve. That's what I'm looking for.
All right, good. How about this table over here?
0.
0, thank you. Anybody else?
1.
1, okay, all right. So, last year, one of the last sermons that I preached to you was from the book of Acts, chapter 28, where it says that from morning till evening, Paul expounded to them, testifying to the kingdom of God, trying to convince them about Jesus. I understand that much. And then it says, both from the law of Moses and from the prophets. And I will confess to you that last year when I preached that, I know that that's true, and I knew that that was true, but I thought to myself, why in the world would anyone turn to the law to tell somebody about Jesus? Is that your evangelism strategy? The first thing that you do when you go out to the field, you say, hey, let me tell you about Genesis chapter 17. No. And so I looked at that last year, knowing that we were going to spend a year in the Torah, and I thought, I sure hope Paul's strategy makes more sense at the end of next year than it did at the end of last year. So that's where I was last year. How about you? How were you this year? How important is the Torah to you now? This table? Okay. Higher. How many of you say it's higher than it was before? All right. How many of you say 10 out of 10? How many say less than 10 out of 10? I appreciate the honesty. So this year, as I think about where I was at the end of last year, the quotation that sticks with me most this year is what Jesus says in Matthew, talked about many a time, where he looks at the story of Moses that we've been studying all year long. He looks over the Torah, the origin story, and he says, guys, this is really, 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 really important. It's not something that you forget. It's not something that you put aside. It's not something that you treat as second class. The origin story from Genesis to Deuteronomy is essential for us to understand God, the kingdom of God, who He is, who we are in relationship to Him. And so, the question is, why? Why is it both that Paul used the law as an evangelism tool? Why is it that Jesus tells us in no uncertain terms that the law is so incredibly important? And the reason, of course, as we've seen this year, is because the Torah tells us our origin story. So from beginning to end, we have one sweeping story that tells us, again, who God is and who we are in relationship to Him. Now, out of curiosity, has anyone struggled to put all the pieces together over this last week? I mean, in all the sermons that you've heard, it's less than 52, so good news there. But in the 40, maybe 40 sermons or so that you've heard on the Torah, do you know how everything fits together? Anybody struggling to put the pieces together? Just me? I look back, and it can be easy to get lost in all of the details. And so the goal that we have tonight and next week is to make sure that here at the end of the year, we know the storyline. I mean, can anyone put the Torah in a single sentence? Anyone summarize it in one sentence? That's our goal. Our goal is to be able to take all that we've heard, all that we've learned, and boil it down into a single, unforgettable sentence that we can take with us as we go from here. Make sense? Great. So, these books that I've given you are a place where you can take notes. Anyone need a pen? Anyone need something to write with? All right. If you do, I welcome you to steal one of our new Bridgeway pens, Sanctuary, or borrow one from the community board. Thank you, Kathy. Excellent.
The community board is here to help the community.
That's right. All right. So here in your booklet, we come to our first section, which is God's creative design. And you remember that we started our year off by looking at just 11 chapters. We wanted to ease you in to all of the scripture that you'd be digesting this year, and just go with 11 chapters looking at how it is that God designed the world. And when you look at those 11 chapters, you can divide them into two parts. They fit basically two different categories. The first couple of chapters, the first two chapters in fact, tell you about how God created the world, God's creation. And the rest of the chapters tell you how humanity corrupted God's good creation. So let's take a look at that in turn. As you think back to Genesis 1 and 2, tell me, Bible scholars, Torah experts, how is it that God created the world?
By speaking.
That's true. That's good. Yeah, and what kind of world did God create with his word?
Without form or void.
It was without form or void, and that was not good. And then what did God do?
And formed it.
Yep, and devoided it. Got rid of all the voids, yes. And how does the Bible describe the world that God created?
It was good.
It wasn't just good. It was good, 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 very good. Right? You look at Genesis chapter 1, and there's no possible way that you can miss the emphasis on what it is that God is trying to tell us. That in the beginning, before there was humanity, God created all that we see around us. God created heavens and earth and light and animals and humans, and he did so with goodness. It was perfect. It was paradise. There was no sin. There was no blemish. There was no pain. Nothing of the brokenness that we see today. That's the world that God created. So, if that's the world that God created, tell me about the humans that God created. Well, in the beginning, in Genesis chapter 2, before we get to the not-so-good parts, how would you describe the humans that God created?
They were good.
Huh?
They were in his image, right?
They're in his image, absolutely, which means what, Angelica?
They were perfect.
What's that?
They were perfect, without sin.
They're without sin, they are innocent. I won't use the word perfect, because
Okay.
only God is perfect, right? But they are without sin, they're without brokenness, they resemble him in certain ways, right? We can think rational thoughts like God can. We have the desire for relationship like God has. We have the desire to be holy like God is holy, created in his image. What else can you tell me about the humans that God created?
Made in the image of God.
Right, excellent. What else, Lois?
God breathed into man a living soul.
That's true. So the very life of God being breathed into humanity. Good. What else do you know about humanity?
They were without death.
Without death, absolutely. That's a perk. What else do you know?
They're man and woman.
Yep, man and woman, and both of them are created in the image of God equally, right? What else?
Well, they were given free will.
Yes, absolutely given free will. And anything else you remember?
Has a perfect garden as long as they don't eat the wrong fruit.
That's right. You can live in paradise as long as you submit to God.
They were the rulers of.
Yes, excellent. 2 key words that you've got to remember about how God created humanity. That we are royal priests, right? God, when He created us in His image. And part of the image of God is that royalty, that rulership. Pardon me as I shut the door. It sounds like they're having a good time this evening. All right, so God created us to rule the earth. Did He have to do that?
No.
Certainly not. He could have created us as robots, as, gosh.
Yes, men.
Yeah, that's good. Yes, men, the lowest guy on the totem pole, right? But when God creates humanity, man and woman in His image, He gives them the freedom to go out and be creative like Him, to cultivate, to subdue, to fill the earth, to have dominion, to take His creative work that He's done in the garden and extend that creative work throughout the earth. Is that good news or bad news? Great news. It's a reason why it's so difficult to be a yes man or to be the lowest person on the totem pole that doesn't do anything significant. God created us for significance, created us to do works of significance. But it wasn't just about being royalty. God created us as priests as well. He says in chapter 2, God put us in the garden, put man in the garden to work it and keep it, which, if you remember, all the way back to the beginning of the year, were 2 terms that God would use of His priests. They're very relational terms. The idea of guarding the presence of God, of protecting the presence of God, of mirroring the presence of God to the world. And so not only does God give us royalty, God give us the ability to rule over the earth, but He creates us to be in relationship with Him, to, again, serve Him, to love Him, to reflect Him, to be with Him, and, as Genesis puts it, to walk with Him in the cool of the day. That is the design of humanity. So again, good news, bad news here.
Awesome news.
Great news, right? The beginning of the story starts better than you can possibly imagine. When we tell the story of who we are and who God is, it starts without sin, without failure, without brokenness, of God and His creation in intimate relationship with one another, enjoying each other's presence, and ready to live for eternity together. Yes?
Mm-hmm.
So, what happens next?
There's snakes coming around.
That's right.
Slithers by.
It's a whisper of an idea into the ear of Eve and Adam. And what does that slippery serpent say?
Nothing good.
What's that?
Nothing good.
Nothing good. That's true.
It won't matter. It won't hurt.
That won't hurt.
They can
That's
be
true.
like
That was part of
God.
it.
Do you
What's
want to
that?
be like
They
God?
can be like God.
Yes, you don't need God in order to enjoy the attributes of God, right? God is holding back on you. If you follow Him, your life will be worse. If you strike out on your own, try it yourself, take your life into your own hands, eat the fruit, and declare your own independence from God, then you'll truly have God-like status, right? That's the promise that He gives. Did God really say? Do you really know that God is good? And so He encourages them to try life without God. Do they do it?
Yep.
They absolutely do it. They absolutely declare themselves independent. They say, we're doing it our own way. We know what you said, God, but we're going to do it our way. And what happens? What happens when they think that without God they can have all of this knowledge? That their eyes will be open. That they will be like God, knowing good from evil. What actually happens in their life without Him? From our origin story.
Well, they see that they're naked
That's true.
and realize that Well, they know evil, they know wrong. They realize that
They do know wrong, and who's in the wrong? They are. Right? So they realize really quick with shame and guilt that just pours down on them that, oh my gosh, trying to strike out on our own, trying to do it without God, cutting the cord and declaring ourselves independent was a horrific idea. So there's blame, there's shame. What else is there in their attempt to strike out on their own? Anybody remember?
They were naked.
Yep, they're
They
naked.
were not-
Sure.
Their eyes were open.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and Justin?
Yeah.
Yes. So, one of the most haunting chapters of all of Scripture, the thing that's, oh gosh, just will keep you up at night is Genesis chapter 5. Because in Genesis chapter 5, you get a list of all of Adam's, or at least some of Adam's descendants. And in it, there's one phrase that repeats over and over and over again. And he died. The results of declaring independence from God, the result of trying to strike out on our own for this secret knowledge, this God-like posture, the thought that God is holding back and we can do better on our own, resulted in death. And he died, 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 and he died. You get the point? What the Bible shows us so clearly is that the decision to go it alone, the decision to cut God out of our life, is actually the decision to cut ourselves off from the source of life. And so corruption comes in every form. There is sin, there is anger, there is lust, there's revenge, there's murder, there's death. All of these things are the result of trying to do it without God. And so humanity wants to get back. They look and we think, oh my goodness, we might have a chance because there was one man named Noah. One righteous man in the midst of an unrighteous generation. One shining star that surely can reset humanity. That can step in and start over and make sure that the human race will be saved. And what happens to Noah? What does God tell him to do?
He walked with God.
Yep. He was the best of us.
He built the ark.
Yep. So Noah's the best of us. He builds the ark because what's God going to do?
Destroy everybody else.
Yes, God is bringing judgment on sin and bringing judgment on sinners. He uncreates the world. Not technically a word, but I'm going to use it. Right? He washes it clean. Then he recreates the world, starting with a new Adam, the righteous man, the blameless man in his generation, the man who walked with God. And here is our hope to get back to paradise. Yes?
Yes.
Does it work?
No.
Certainly not. Because when Noah gets off the boat, he plants a garden, gets drunk, and then Ham does some sketchy stuff that we don't need to talk about tonight. If you want to go back and hear about it, Pastor Joey's got a sermon for you back in Genesis 9. Right? So almost immediately, the world has been washed clean. The world has been recreated. The world has been, again, it's a world ready for righteousness to dwell in. And Noah can't do it. Why? Why couldn't Noah be the righteous man? Because sin goes beyond the skin. It goes to the very heart of who we are as humanity. That there's no way to out-righteous God. There's no way to earn our way back to God. If the most righteous man among us can't do it, what hope do the rest of us have? None. So the decision to go it alone and cut ourselves off from God not only results in death, but it results in depravity, meaning that you can't earn your way back. You can't do enough good deeds. You can't do enough good works in order that God will look on you and say, you know what, Maria, you're good enough, I'll let you in. You know what, Angelica, you're good enough, I'll let you in. Javier, good enough, I'll let you in. If Noah couldn't do it, none of us can do it because sin is not just, a scratch, right? Sin is a heart disease that can't be cured by good works. Does humanity give up? Do they give up trying to get back to the garden, back to paradise?
No.
Certainly not. What do they do next?
Start building stuff.
They start building. They pull out their muscle, right? If we can't get there with our morality, if we can't be good enough to get back to the garden, then surely we can muscle our way back in. After all, we are strong, we are powerful, we're intelligent. And so a group of humans come together and they say, let's build ourselves a tower with its top to the heavens and a city. City and a tower. Tell me, what is it that they're trying to do here?
Reach God.
Yep. When they build this tower, it's not necessarily something that is going all the way up in the atmosphere, but what they were building was, what in ancient world was called a ziggurat, which was a monument that was built in order to force the gods out of the sky down onto earth to do your bidding. And so at the bottom of this tower, at the bottom of this ladder, you would leave a bed for the gods, you would leave food for the gods, because somebody's got to feed them, right? That's what they thought. And they had all these different rituals, incantations, sacrifices that they would do to try to force the gods from on high to come and do the will of men below. And the ancients thought that you could do that. They thought that was a legitimate way of doing that. So they said to themselves, well, let's try it with Yahweh. Let's try it with the God of the universe and try to force him out of the sky. Can they muscle God out of the sky?
No.
Certainly not. What becomes of their project, their vain, glorious project
They
of
confuse their
trying
language.
right? They are absolutely deluded. He
Scattered.
confuses their language, scatters them over the face of the earth. They can no longer continue the building project. In fact, it says they're trying to build a tower that reaches up into the heavens, and God has to come down to earth just so he can see this pitiful little project that they're doing, right? Again, there's no way for them to force their way, muscle their way back into God's presence. And so the story of Genesis 1 through 11 is the story of God creating a good world without sin, without flaw, without brokenness, without defect, and humanity coming in and saying, that was good, but we can do better. That was a nice first draft, God, but we're going to publish the final draft in our version to be better than this. And when they grasp for wisdom, they fall into death. When they grasp for morality, they fall into sin. When they grasp for power, they fall into being just absolutely delusion, being scattered over the face of the earth. And so that leaves you then with this nagging question of what is humanity's only hope to return to God's good design. In fact, in your little booklet, and I should have put page numbers, but about halfway through, you'll see a page that looks like this, that has... it says key problems, key points, key observations, all those things. Genesis 1 through 11 is the key problem to the first half of the origin story. Everybody find that in your booklets? Write that down. This is the question that the whole Torah is trying to drive at. From this point to the end of Deuteronomy, which we looked at on Sunday, all of it is asking this question right here. What is humanity's only hope to return to God's good design? And so you look at the first 11 chapters of Genesis, and they are both beautiful and heartbreaking at the exact same time. Right? You look and you see some of the highest hopes that humanity has ever experienced. A life with God, a life without death, a life without brokenness. I mean, it's humanity as God intended it to be, which, I mean, if we're honest and look at the world that we live in today, is something that we long to return to. And so these chapters, they are beautiful in the reality that they paint of God's intention, and yet they were equally heartbreaking in describing and depicting the sin of humanity and the hopelessness of humanity when we are left to our own devices. Because by ourselves, there is no possible way that we can return to the intention of God, to the design of God. By ourselves, no matter how wise we think we are, no matter how good we think we are, no matter how strong we think we are, in every case, it is not enough to get back to the way that God intended. Does that make sense? Does that sound anything like Romans to you? Does that sound anything like a gospel presentation to you? Because it sure sounds a lot like a gospel presentation to me. Remember back when Paul said that he would preach from the law, from the books of Moses, in order to talk about Jesus? Genesis 1 through 11 gives us our need for Jesus. Because apart from him, when left to our own devices, what hope do we possibly have? Does the story end here? No. Who's glad the story doesn't end there? Everyone in the room, right? Because what would happen if the story ended in chapter 11 of Genesis? You are absolutely, utterly without help, without hope, without a future. There is nothing, and I mean literally nothing, that the human race can do in and of itself to save itself. All we have is just to live out a miserable existence with all of the burdens of sin, all of the lust, anger, envy, jealousy, gossip, sickness, disease, brokenness, living with all of that weight until you die and experience eternal separation from God. That's where we leave in Genesis 11. Is there any hope?
Not at that point.
What's that?
Not at that point.
Not at that point, but in the story that we're telling, is there any hope? What is the hope?
No.
What's that?
No.
Noah? Well, we were recording this. We'll have you go back and listen to the recording, Justin. It's good. Our only hope is that God makes a promise to Abraham. That God comes along and says, I'm going to undo what you all have done. I'm going to take the brokenness, the sin, the death, the depravity, the delusion. I'm going to take all of that and turn it on its head and cleanse from top to bottom. God makes a promise to Abraham. And so Genesis 12 through Exodus 15, which is our second banner of the year, is all about the promise that God makes. Now, in light of the promise, or in light of the problem that we have in Genesis 1 through 11, and it's a pretty big problem, yes? How big does God's promise need to be in order to fix the problem?
Huge.
Huge.
Puts it on his life.
Right?
I mean, on his.
Yep, he swears on himself. So in Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through 3, again, if this is not part of your understanding of the story, if you can't, by mind, go back and say, let's look at Genesis 12 to see what God's promise was, commit that to memory. And again, if you're in your book, should have had pages, but we're looking at Abraham. It says Abraham at the top. In Genesis 12, God comes. He says, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to a land that I will show you. And I will make of you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you. Him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Translation, everything that sin has touched, God promises to cure. God promises to reverse the curse of sin. And so again, before I say that, somebody tell me, who is Abram at this point? Good guy, bad guy?
He's a pagan.
What's that?
He's a pagan.
He's an absolute, utter pagan. Noah was the righteous dude, right? He was the guy that walked with God. He was blameless in his generation. That is not how we meet Abram. We meet Abram, according to later passages of the Bible, as an idolater down by the river with dear old dad worshiping his own gods. So what did Abram do to deserve the promise that God gave?
Nothing.
Absolutely nothing. Because what do we learn from Genesis 1 through 11 about being good enough for the promise? Can't be.
Can't do it.
Nobody can do it. So God chooses a family out of all the families in the world, not because they are better than anyone else, not because they are stronger than anyone else, not because they are wiser than anyone else. They're not. Why does God choose the family of Abraham?
Because he did.
Yeah? What does that tell you about God, Lois?
He's in control.
Yes, what else does it tell you about God?
Well, he gets all the glory when it works.
When it works, it is all up to him and is not at all up to the individual family, right? And so how would you describe Abraham's family?
Pagans.
What's that?
Pagans.
They lived in a very pagan lifestyle, right? Certainly Abraham's father, mother, siblings, sure. But even Abraham's own kids, Isaac, and Isaac's kids, and their kids, not exactly the cream of the crop when it comes to morality. And so when you look at this section, as I said earlier, that Genesis 12 through 15 is all about how big God's promise has to be. Because if the problem of humanity is as great as we described it to be, then the promise has got to be so much greater than our problems, right? And so it's not surprising to find then that in these chapters, God's promise is tested over and over and over again. 3, 6, 9, 12 times. There's 12 different massive challenges to the promises of God, where you as the reader are reading along and saying, I don't know if God's promise can survive this one. I know he said that he was going to undo the curse of sin, but gosh, it looks like he's not going to be able to do it. So in the life of Abraham, 3 major challenges. First one, God promises a land, and Abraham has no land.
No land.
God says, go from the land of your forefathers to the land I will show you. Abraham leaves. He shows up, and what does he find in the land of Canaan? Big old welcoming land where he stakes a claim forever, right? No.
Giants.
What does he find is that there is no room in the inn. The land is already occupied. It's like showing up and saying, hey, God told me to go to your house, Kathy. I'm here to take possession of it. And finding that Kathy already owns it. She's got the deed, the title of the house, right? Abraham shows up, finds that the land is already occupied. And God says, don't worry. I swear on my very life to give you, your family, this land. Does God do it? Eventually. Second problem that Abraham encounters is that he has no kids. God says, I will multiply your children. Your family will be a blessing to the world. I will use your family to bring my blessings to this broken world. Abraham looks around, realizes he has no kids, and does what?
Has kids with
Sleeps with Hagar.
Hagar.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, we got a problem here. We're going to solve it ourselves. Does that work? No. In fact, Abram allows Sarai to sleep, or to go and allows the Pharaoh to take her into his harem and very likely sleep with her, theoretically compromising the whole promise of God for legitimate kids from Abram. What does God do? God protects Sarai, keeps her from the Pharaoh, brings her back home, miraculously provides Isaac. God says, go sacrifice Isaac, but then God protects Isaac, and Abraham has a kid. But then, at the end of Abraham's life, there's a threat that there's no future. It's good that we've got Abraham and Sarah. That's good news. We've got a son now, Isaac. But 3 people, a promise does not make. 3 people is a few people shy of the blessing that God had promised. Towards the end of Abraham's life, he has no land in the promised land. He has no wife for his son Isaac. And he's looking and saying, is there any future? What does God do? He tells him, go buy a plot of land in Canaan. It will be the down payment for the coming promise. He says, go send your servant out to find a wife for your son Isaac. Brings back Rebekah, the down payment of offspring. And so in Abraham's life, God's promise is threatened by no land, no kids, no future. And in all 3 instances, is God big enough to overcome those challenges?
Yes.
Absolutely. Is God's promise at all in threat from the problems that we see in this world?
No.
No. God, even when Abraham and Sarah think that they've got it all figured out and they've got the plan, God says, don't worry, guys. I've got this figured out. Trust in me. All right, God's promise is not only tested in Abraham's life, it's also tested in Jacob's life. In 3 different situations, the promise is threatened by the kind of son that Jacob happens to be. We meet him early on where he is a thief. He goes and he steals the promised blessing from his brother Esau. He manipulates his father with his mother's help. And you look and you say, if this is the kind of family that God is working with, surely their sin is going to end the promise. I mean, God can't work with a thief. And yet, in the midst of it, God protects Jacob's life, spares his life, sends him off to dear old Uncle Laban. And Jacob gets to live, even though Esau wants to murder him. While Jacob is in the land with dear old Uncle Laban back home at his mother's place, his Uncle Laban and him commit fraud against each other. They try to one-up each other in stealing what belongs to each other. Right? Laban makes certain promises about wives. Jacob makes certain promises about flocks. They're trying to one-up each other in deception. The whole story is just this icky, awful, it's in some senses disgusting to read of all the sin and depravity that existed in that family. Does that stop God's promise?
No.
Absolutely not. Because God takes Jacob, the deceiving thief that he was, and he transforms his heart. God wrestles with him, puts his hip out of joint, and from that moment on, Jacob says, I need to worship this God. But all is not well, because towards the end of his life, or middle of his life, I suppose, Jacob decides that he's going to live among the people of the land, that he's going to become one with his neighbors, to be like them, think like them, act like them, which is not good news for the promise of God. Because what is God's promise trying to do? Reverse the curse of sin. What are the pagans trying to do? Live in their sin. And so as readers, we're looking and saying, surely this is it. Surely God's promise can't survive this assimilation, dilution, the watering down of God's promise. I mean, Jacob wrestled with God. Jacob had this encounter with God. And here he goes trying to live like his neighbors. But is that the end of the story? Certainly not. Because God preserves his people from idolatry. God takes them, he sends them away, preserves them in all of that sin. We see something similar. That God's promise is not only tested in the life of Abraham, tested in the life of Jacob, but God's promise is tested in the life of Jacob's sons. That over and over and over again, God's promise comes up against great threats in that time. The first one is the story of Joseph, where the brothers try to strip him of all that God has promised. They take his robe, put him in the pit, sell him to slavery, he gets put into prison. And does that end the promise of God?
No.
Because God prospers Joseph's life. That even in slavery, even in prison, even when he stands before Pharaoh as a nobody, God elevates Joseph to number 2 in the kingdom of Egypt. It doesn't matter that he's a nobody from a no-name town. It just matters that he belongs to God. Meanwhile, the family that has the promise of God, the 12 sons of Jacob, are incredibly fractured. There is an intense amount of anger, suspicion, hatred that is among them. And it looks like the family is just going to blow apart at the seams. Like there's going to be so much disunity that there's no hope of God's promise actually continuing. Like these people are going to murder each other from starvation, and that's the end of the story. Right? No. Because again, God does a miracle. God has planned from eternity past to elevate Joseph as the second highest ruler in Egypt, such that when the brothers are forced, because they are starving, literally starving, when they are forced to come to Egypt to buy grain from Pharaoh just so they can survive, who's there? Joseph. And what does God do with Joseph? He uses him to unite the family. He uses them to expose their sin, to convict them of the way that they treated their father, the way that they treated their brother Joseph, the way that they were treating one another. That by the end of the story, they are a family that is reunited, a family that confesses, a family that weeps, a family that says, take my life so that you can spare yours. God does such a work of transformation that he brings back a family that is going to blow apart and reunites them. But then, when things are good, they face an entirely different challenge. Things are so good, the pastures are green, they've got a great land, they've got plenty of flocks, they're living down in Egypt, that the threat is to just enjoy the good life here on earth. to abdicate, to abandon the blessing, to say, you know what? We've had so many good things from God. The sheep are doing fine. We've got plenty of goats. The family's back together. We're living in a green land. Let's just forget about those promises down the road. Do they forget about the promises? No. Because God, through Jacob, blesses the family and tells them a prophecy about their future, that there is a day coming with a king who will rule in a land that will be so good that they do not abandon the promises. So again, God's promise is pressed, God's promise is tested, and who's faithful in the end? God. Doesn't stop there, because God's promise is tested one last time by Egypt. That the greatest possible challenge, or at least the worst possible challenge, comes through their awful treatment in Egypt. The book of Exodus opens in the first couple of chapters where the people are desperate. They're living in absolute desperation. They're in slavery. Their sons are being murdered by the people of the land. And they have absolutely no strength in themselves. They have no power. They have no resources. They have no army. There's literally nothing that they can do. The nation of Israel wants to rule over them and destroy them. Is all lost?
No.
Certainly not. Because as the book of Exodus says, God sees, God hears, God rises up to defend his people. He sends Moses to go and call Pharaoh to set them free. And Moses goes, asks Pharaoh to let his people go, and Pharaoh says, sure, no problem. Right? Not quite. Moses goes, says, let my people free. Pharaoh basically laughs him off and says, absolutely not, and he makes life worse. He says, double their load, make it harder on them. I want you to just grind this people into oblivion. Don't give them the resources, make them make their own bricks. The people of Israel are so angry with Moses that they say, what have you done? How could you do this to us? Our life was better before you showed up. Is all hope lost? Certainly not. Because God has all power in the universe. That God marshals all of his power to demonstrate in all the places that he is greater than every Egyptian god. That he is greater than the god of darkness. He's greater than the sun god. He's greater than the god over death. In every possible way, God is greater. At the end, Pharaoh says, get out of here. All hope is not lost. Until then, as Pharaoh decides that he wants to chase after the people of God. He assembles all of his chariots and all of his horses. They run as fast as they can. They find that the Israelites are boxed in between the sea and the wilderness. And the people of God cry out, what have you done to us? These officers, these chariots, these bows, these arrows, these Egyptians are angry. Their sons have just died. They are ready to annihilate us. Is the story of Israel over?
No.
Nope.
Because what does God do? Parts the sea. They go through unscathed, unharmed. God closes the water in on the Egyptians, and the people of God are finally set free. And on the other side of the Red Sea, what do they say in chapter 15? The Lord is my strength and my song, and he has become my salvation. This is my God, and I will praise him, my Father's God, and I will exalt him. If we were in a play or in a musical, this would be the intermission. This would be the end of Act 1. Because in these chapters, from Genesis 12 through Exodus 15, what do we discover? In all those different stories where God's promise is tested and tried in every possible way, what do we find out?
It stays true.
That God is absolutely true to his promise. What else do we find out?
God is faithful.
That God is faithful to his promise. What else?
And all powerful.
That God has the power to back up the promises. It's one thing to say, I'm going to be faithful to my promise. It's another thing to actually do it. And no matter what Satan throws at God, whether it's the barrenness of Sarah, or the sin of Jacob, or the suffering of Joseph, or the oppression of Pharaoh, no matter what Satan tries to throw at the promise of God, he cannot stop the promises from going forward. He cannot keep God from fulfilling the promise to Abraham to reverse the curse of sin. So going back then to our question. Our question in the first part of our origin story was this: what is humanity's only hope to return to God's good design? What's the answer to that?
God's redemptive promise.
Yes, God's redeeming promise. Our only hope is trusting in God to keep his promise to restore all things. One of the key features of all the story of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the 12 boys, the nation of Israel, all of that, you see that they are slightly less than the ideal moral individuals we would hope them to be. Right? In so many different ways, their sin just keeps oozing out of them. In so many different ways, we're looking and saying, God, where's your judgment against these people? And yet, for all of them, each one of them eventually does what? What do they all have in common? From Abraham to Isaac to Jacob to the 12 to the nation of Israel, what does every single one of them in every generation do? They get really smart. They work really hard to be good people.
They fail.
They fail over and over again.
Yeah.
And yet, in their failure, what do? They bow their knee to God. Every one of them, at different points in their life, eventually comes to the place where they say, God, I can't, but you can. God, I can't make this work. I can't force this to happen. I can't manipulate my way into it. I can't negotiate with the nations around me to get it. There's nothing that I can do. And in each one of these cases, they receive the promise of God by faith and only by faith. It is not because they are so good. It is not because they are so powerful. It is not because they are so brilliant. It is not because they are so well connected. It is only because each one of them does what Jacob was forced to do, and that is to bow his knee and say, I give. God, I trust you. Abraham does that when he sacrifices his son Isaac. Jacob does that, again, when he wrestles with God. Jacob's sons do that when they're forced to admit their need for grain in Egypt. And the nation of Israel does that when they say, God, we will follow you out of this land. In each case, they put their faith in the God of promise. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. When you think about that story, I mean, what does that do to you internally? How does that make you, what's your internal reaction hearing the story, the first half of the origin story?
It gives me hope.
Yes. Why does it give you hope, Angelica?
Because I'm a wretched and defeated. Just these people were all.
Yeah. Because these people were just as awful as I am.
Yeah.
Right? These people were sinners just like I am. Again, if enjoying the promise of God had anything to do with our own effort, every one of us would fail. But because the promise of God and enjoying his promise has everything to do with his faithfulness, any one of us, from the best among us to the worst, from the oldest to the youngest, from the immigrant to the ruler, every one of us can experience the promise of God because of the faithfulness of God. And so the story that we tell is not a story of how great we are, but a story of how great our God is. Does that sound anything like the gospel to you? Because it sounds a lot like the gospel to me. Going back to what Paul said or what was said of Paul in the book of Acts, that he preached about Jesus, tried to convince the Jews about Jesus by going back to the law. It makes perfect sense. Because going back to the law, going back and saying, look, your hope is not in yourself, your hope is in God and in the Son that he has sent, Jesus, who died on the cross for our sins. That's where our hope is. It depends on him and his faithfulness alone. Without him, there is no hope. Because of him, we have every hope in the world if we will do what Abraham did, which was believe in God, and it will be counted to you as righteousness. Translation, you can be in right relationship with God if you trust him to do what he said he's going to do. And my friends, that is That's why we're here. I mean, that's what distinguishes the Christian faith from all the other faiths around. When everyone else says, try harder, do better, make more sacrifices, give more money, when they give you all of these solutions, we know that humanity has tried that and failed that for generations. We know that our hope is only in the God who made the promise to reverse the curse of sin. And that is the good news of the gospel for us, that he's done it through his son Jesus. So what do you do with it? If that's the story, what do you do with the story as it's been told? Around your table, spend some time talking to each other. What are you going to do with that, the first half of the story?
Stop trusting myself. I mean, stop thinking I can fix things, or just give it to God. Like really, just give it to Him and know that His will be done. And have that peace, knowing how powerful He is. Maybe what you want is not what God is intended for you to get, and be okay with that. I mean, we are Abraham. We are, we are the Israelites.
Basically, he said, we do the same thing. We wait until we hit bottom, and then we're like, okay, fix it. We could have been asking for the fix the whole way through, and maybe.
Thinking we can
That trusting, like we don't trust until we have no choice.
I think sometimes, at least for me, I feel like, okay, well, God, what's my part? I guess this is my part. I should be doing this, or I should be doing that, and saying, sometimes I just go, God has a plan. And when I say God has a plan, it's like, hey, it's yours. I have this little song I sing. It's my little.
I know. I have some songs for certain situations too, and they like help me bring things into focus.
It's a song I learned when I was 16 years old, and when things get bad, it's just a thing that I like a mantra, and I